Okay, here we have the master cutoff switch to the power of the car. Here's the fuel toggle switch that runs both main pump and transfer pump, both two pumps. And over here are circuit breakers for each pump. There's two ignition circuit breakers, one for the dash power, another ignition circuit breaker, and a fuel pump circuit breaker. And there's also a windshield wiper circuit breaker, which in is on all the breakers and out is off. So you'll run all of these on except for the wipers. Here's the fire pull for the driver. This is brake bias. Left is front, more front brake, and turning the knob right is more rear brake. And obviously the starter button. And over here at the gauges, the big red light is the alternator light, which is also a fan belt light. If that light comes on, the fan could be blown off or the alternator could be not charging. Over here is tank level, which is not used. Oil level tank on the right side, and tank, which is fuel, on the left side, which does read out of the fuel cell. RPM with a recall, and your oil pressure gauge and oil temp gauge, which 180 is operating temperature, and it can go a little higher on hot days. If it is not up to 180, you want to tape off the radiator or the oil cooler. Put rows of duct tape on the oil cooler for it to be able to reach 180. And then next to that is oil pressure, which with a cold engine idling, it should be 60 pounds of oil pressure. And scavenge filter. Yep, over here is the scavenge oil filter, which is cleanable. You remove it, disassemble it, and it has a screen inside of it, which can be cleaned out with brake clean, reassembled and reused. That is the
ECU,
ignition ECU
with the COM cable.
COM cable is provided in a box. We'll plug into there. And then the ignition relay, which is a 40 amp relay, which supplies power to the ignition coils on the engine. It's right there. Further in the front of the engine, front of the car here, we have two fuel pumps, which are labeled main fuel pump and transfer fuel pump. Transfer fuel pump takes the fuel from the fuel cell, transfers it up to the surge tank. Then from the bottom of that surge tank goes into the main fuel pump, which the main fuel pump then feeds the engine. Over here is a fuel filter, which is a factory KL21 Porsche fuel filter. It's replaceable, not cleanable. And up here you have your individual master cylinders. Two are for the brake, front and rear, and one is for the clutch. And they should remain about that level there. If they're anywhere close to full, they will spill over. So you don't want to run them completely full. Over here at the oil tank, this is the oil cap. You put oil in right here to the engine as is needed. And with the engine warmed up at 180 degrees If you can see that baffle down in there, that metal plate with holes in it, the oil level should be right at that or below it. That should be the operating oil level with the engine up to temp. These are the JRZ shock canisters. The adjustment knob on the top here. The shock pressure will be set on the bottom there. One on each four corners.
Around 150 pounds in the front and 175 pounds in the rear. Shock canister.
Write that stuff down. Here's the engine. Down here is the crank sensor, which triggers the ignition system when to fire. It's a 32 minus 2 teeth wheel, and the sensor gap on that is about 25 thousandths of a gap between the sensor and the wheel. And there are the carburetors. There are sight glass windows on the side of the carburetor. They should always be about halfway in the sight glass. That is how much fuel is in the carburetor. That should be halfway.
Idle jets. Talking about the idle.
The idle jets, if the engine runs rough at idle or just off idle, more than likely it's a clogged idle jet, and that is these right here. There's 3 on each side. You would remove those and blow them out with compressed air or brake clean. And it's a really small jet, so it'll be hard to tell until you pull them all the way out and apart and clean them. And in here is the fuel pressure gauge, which should be operating at 3 psi at a standstill or running. And there's the ignition igniters, 2 per side. And these are fuel filters here, which are, you can remove, disassemble, clean, and reassemble and reuse. One on each carburetor. They should be cleaned, you know, possibly once every weekend before you go out for a race weekend. Here's the fan belt. Fan belt is a size 10 by 725. There's one shim out here. In order to tighten the belt, you would remove shims from in between each pulley half and put them on the outside here. Vice versa, to loosen the belt, you would put the shim that is out here in between the 2 pulley halves. And here are the remote cans for the rear shocks. Shock pressure on the bottom, adjuster on the top. The seat is fixed position. You do have some options. 2 other holes. Lower, raise the rear and the front. Throttle cable is a push-pull cable. It's down there, should not need or require any adjustment. There's a clutch pedal stop that is adjustable. It is set right now, but can be adjusted. Battery right there, self-explanatory. This is the fire suppression system fire bottle here. There's a pin that you can put in for travel use. case so nobody accidentally bumps it or pulls it. And that is the level of the charge. Should always remain in the green. Goes below green to have it serviced. There's a video camera mount. This vent in this gauge hole is functionable. It does go up and provide some air for the driver. That's about it. This is the door pull. Very simple pins that lock the door. This releases it. This is the window net. Which is spring loaded. Goes in like so, and turn that handle in so the driver can reach it.
Master switch.
It's the external master switch. It provides the same function as the internal one. Quick release steering wheel. I'll show you how to start it. You want to turn that on and then I'll start it up. So if you get in for the first time, the car's been sitting, you can pull the ignition circuit breaker and crank for oil pressure with the fuel off, battery on. Cranking for oil pressure, waiting for the gauge to come up. It has come up a little bit, you'll see. Now we'll turn all these on. The fuel, the ignition, and the fuel pumps up. Pump it about 3 times and crack the throttle. Okay.